in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's the Never Ending Battle, the Superman ranking podcast, and I'm your host, Jordan. Join me each week as I take a look at the Man of Steel and his extended family as they carry out their never-ending battle for truth, justice, and rank these stories from best to worst. This week, I'm taking a look at one of my favorite times of the year, Halloween. Now, the general macabre and melancholy of the weather, meeting up with the autumnal bliss of this time of year, makes it for just a deeply enjoyable time for me. I love this sense of just kind of weariness and gloom, but it's also just a delightful amount. It's not like winter where it's overbearing. It's this nice, pleasant, crisp air. The air just starts cooling off. Everything starts looking really beautiful. It's a nice, beautiful harvest, and everything's coming together, and Halloween just caps it all off. Now, one of my favorite things about the Halloween season is also not just reading various scary stories or watching various scary movies, but also is reading Halloween comics. One of my favorite things to do is to go look at all the various Halloween comics that you can find out there, and I'm talking not just the standard scary stuff or like horror comics you could find. I'm talking the dedicated Halloween books. Now, of all the publishers, major publishers, DC Comics is the one that does the most holiday-themed books, and I'm not just talking Halloween, I'm talking like Christmas. They'll do stuff for Valentine's Day. They do stuff for New Year's Evil, for goodness sake. And also, on top of that, they're much better at the horror comics than, say, Marvel. Marvel has always been more focused on mostly the superhero stuff since the Silver Age. Yes, Marvel has had other lines of books over the years, but most of their stuff is focused on that Silver Age aspects where everything's mostly, it's trying to find the comics code is a little safe sometimes. DC, though, DC has a deep history of horror comics. They have long-running horror series such as the House of Mystery, House of Secrets, and even their roots go all the way back to the original EC comics in the earliest days. And it should come as no surprise that when it comes to these Halloween horror books, Superman has made numerous appearances in these books over the many years. And it's kind of an interesting place to look at Superman because, as many may know, one of Superman's main weaknesses, besides kryptonite, is an increased vulnerability to something such as magic. So Superman generally does not care for the supernatural, and now we get to see in these various adventures what happens when Superman comes across the supernatural. Now, here at the Neverending Battle, each episode is themed around some central idea, because I'm a sucker for that. And last week we had, for example, the Secret Origins, and this week it is Halloween, so it felt like it should be Halloween. It's obviously based on the intro. So we're going to look at 3 specifically Halloween stories starring the Man of Steel. These are stories that take place on Halloween, explicitly Halloween, and they are various adventures dealing with that. Now, I should stress, one of these stories are going to push the limits of our already tenuous rules here in just the second episode of the show, but I felt like it was worth including and worth discussing. Round 1. DC Comics presents number 53, Superman in the House of Mystery. The Haunting Dooms of Halloween, with a cover date of January 1983, with a creative team featuring writer Dan Mishkin, art by the legendary Curt Swan, inked by Tony DeZunga, colors by Gene D'Angelo, and letters by John Constanza. It is Halloween night, and the mischievous imp, Mr. Mxyptlk, is up to his old tricks by kidnapping Lois and treating Superman to a trip to the House of Mystery. Now, Superman must save Lois by the witching hour, or less she would be lost forever in the House of Mystery. Talking some talent here. The creative team for this book is some pretty big heavyweights. Dan Mishkin, he is the writer for DC's House of Mystery at the time of this series publication, with an 18-issue run of the long-running series of 300-plus issues. Dan Mishkin is also known for having a 28-issue run of Wonder Woman during this same time period in the lead-up to The Crisis. And he would also be a part of co-creating the DC characters of Blue Devil and Amethyst of Jim's World. And the second part of this team is probably one that doesn't require any introduction, but let's talk about him anyway. We got to give him his flowers, and that is the legendary Curt Swan. Now, this being a Superman podcast, we have to pay our respects. Curt Swan is the definitive Superman artist, with a career spanning 40 years with roughly estimated 700 issues of Superman family-related titles under his belt. Curt Swan is the definitive Superman artist. If you are looking at a Superman comic from, say, the 1960s to the 1980s, there's a good chance you are looking at a Curt Swan-inspired book. All right, some background to this story. So I've already alluded to here about the House of Mystery, but let's talk about DC Comics Presents. DC Comics Presents was the Superman team up book. It allowed for new creative teams to try out alongside showcasing some lesser characters alongside the Man of Steel. It was basically DC's secondary book to the Brave and the Bold. The Brave and the Bold being more of the Batman team up book. DC Comics Presents was the Superman team up book. The House of Mystery, let's talk about that real quick. As I mentioned earlier, the House of Mystery is a long-running DC horror anthology book. Well, supernatural horror fantasy anthology. It runs for over 300 issues, 321 issues to be exact, with 12 issues later on being 12 later issues being Elvira's House of Mystery, and that kind of gets lumped in together. So we're looking at around 333 issues of this horror anthology. The problem with this horror anthology is there's a good stretch there where it runs under the Comics Code Authority. And the Comics Code Authority was this reactionary attempt to self-police, self-censor comics for the worst in large ways. There were some interesting things that came about from it, but the whole thing with the Comic Code Authority is still self-censorship. And one of the big things was they could not show horror elements like vampires, demons, and various other monsters, which was really hard for a House of Mystery, literally a horror anthology book. They persevered though, and by the mid-70s, DC starts pushing back on the Comic Code Authority, and we start seeing the return to these various, spooky characters. And this issue is no different. You're seeing, really haunted characters. With the House of Mystery, basically is an anthology book, so each issue would be a different story, and there may be some connective tissue. And for long stretches of the book, the caretaker of the House of Mystery was Cain, as in the biblical Cain, as in the son of Adam that kills his brother. And one of the long-running gags for long stretches of comics, especially in something like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, is Cain and Abel constantly having fights and killing Cain trying to kill Abel. This one, Cain is more of a comedic character, and he's interesting. He's fun. And he's the main caretaker. He interacts with the house. He talks to the kids that are there. He tells horror stories, spooky stories. It's fine. He's like the crypt keeper of sorts, if you want to go like a Tales of the Crypt route. Now, the reason I picked this comic. So for years, I've been doing on my own website on extremelyuncanny.com and various places. I like to talk about Halloween comics, and this is one of those comics. This is one I've always looked at on my list, and it's Superman out of his element. Superman doesn't do magic, famously, and it's an interesting book. I always thought the cover was captivating, and I always had it on my list. So this year, when I was coming around trying to figure out episodes, ideas, and I was like, hey, I need a Halloween episode. And I kicked around a bunch of different stuff, like Deceased and DC versus Vampires, and there's various little horror one-shots they did over the last several years. And while those are cool and all, I really wanted to do this one. And I thought this was a fun one. It's honestly a really fun little Halloween haunt. It's spooky. It's not creepy. It's not too over-the-top scary. It's meant to be, it's meant for, younger kids. I wouldn't say super young, but, appropriate for my sons or, they're 10 years old. This is something they easily could have enjoyed. And it's a fun little comic. There's a lot of things that worked in this comic because it is just Mr. Mxyptlk messing with Superman using the House of Mystery. You get Superman having to deal with all the bullcrap that goes with that. Some moments that really stuck out with me were like the Daily Planet having this costume party at Lois's house where all the people there are dressed up like various superheroes and there's not visual gags. And one of the best parts is Superman is actually dressed like Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, for some reason. What ends up happening is Mxyptlk decides to use his magical powers to turn people who's in their costumes into what their costumes represents. Meaning the story opens literally with a little boy dressed as Superman turning into Superman and then having to do Mr. Mxyptlk's bidding. And that allows for some crazy hijinks as the not Superman attacks the party to go kidnap Lois because Mr. Mxyptlk is, up to his own games. So Clark has to do some really fun things like he ends up tricking people to get out of the costume party because this is very much that late, I'm going to say Silver Age. It's definitely in the Bronze Age era. It's pre-Crisis. It's about, just a couple years shy of Crisis here. So when he is having to figure out how to get out of this party, he's acting all like meek and timid. And he decides to come up with a ploy to go chase this fake Superman. And he uses Steve Lombard, who is just doof. He's played by Beck Bennett in the Superman movie that just came out, and he's a doof in there. Well, Steve Lombard is always a doof. That's kind of like the going thing with Steve Lombard. He's an idiot. He's everybody's favorite idiot. and he quickly deduces that the Superman is fake, and he says like, Clark, aren't you going to do something? And Clark's like, I don't know. And then he uses his powers secretly to heat up the ring. And he's wearing the fake Green Lantern ring to make it look like it's glowing, but not green. Either way, Steve Lombard goes, you got the powers too. You've got magic gifts. Got to do something about it. So he fakes he can fly. He's got the Green Lantern powers so he can leave to go chase Lois. And it's just this dumb kind of BS that takes place in these kind of comics. It's not great comics by any means. It's not going to be some major artistic thing. It's not some profound statement about the state of man. What actually makes the comic work really well, whenever Superman finally manages to get to the House of Mystery, he's kind of confused by this place, and he decides to play along with the game, not knowing it's Mr. Mxyptlk. Nor does he know the House of Mystery, because Mr. Mxyptlk is hiding Kane and everybody from it. And Mr. Mxyptlk is turning all the kids in the House of Mystery, who's in the costumes, into these monsters. So we have like these werewolves and vampires and skeletons. And the House of Mystery's big thing, it's a labyrinthine house. There's no correct path through the house. Superman's having to go through this. He's having to fight like these giant monsters and stuff that's taking place. What makes the issue so fun is Curt Swan's art here. Now, Curt Swan is, I guess I mentioned earlier, the definitive Superman artist for his era. Curt Swan is to Superman what Jim Aparo is to Batman. But what really stood out here in this issue is that Curt Swan starts playing around with the layout a little bit. So in this comic, there's bits where Superman's having to fly through the house. And as he's flying through, the rooms are changing their orientation. They're going perpendicular to each other. There's bits where the paneling actually still vertical. It still goes in traditional page format so that you can still read it correctly. But there's these pages where Superman's having to like fly at a different angle on the page. It's not much, don't get me wrong. Don't misconstrue this as like some major innovative art. This is something you don't typically see with a Curt Swan piece, especially, and it actually reminds me of a more recent comic, Batman Volume 2, number 5. Now, where Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's first arc on the New 52 Batman is this Court of Owls story, and Batman is getting dumped into this labyrinth maze, and the issue, they do some innovative stuff in that one where you have to turn the comic around physically and look at the pages in different angles to see, and you get to see what Batman is seeing, and you see all those different angles, and it kind of makes a real topsy-turvy twisty thing. And we don't see that fully realized here. Curt Swan's doing some cool stuff where the layouts kind of change and they get weird, and you're not fully rotating the pages, but you are finding yourself turning the page just a little bit to kind of see the full scope, and it does some really cool stuff. And it really is just a fun comic where it's just a simple one issue, one and done story. The whole time while this is going on, Dan Mishkin has got Kane and Mxyptlk kind of bickering at each other, because Mxyptlk has been at the House of Mystery before, and Kane just really can't stand the dude. And Mxyptlk is like taunting Superman and Kane can't tell Superman what's going on. There's a bit where Superman gets stuck in this kind of like world of unrelenting nightmare where he realizes that everybody knows Clark Kent and Superman are the same, and it upsets Jimmy Olsen, and there's all sorts of stuff that takes place. Like people oddly enough don't try to get revenge against Superman in this nightmare scenario. They're instead getting revenge on Clark for being an investigative journalist, which is actually a really interesting take. And they end up doing damage to all the Daily Planet. It's really interesting bit there we see, and Mxyptlk is like taunting Superman at the time, and Kane is stuck in kind of like this Charles Dickens Christmas Carol where he can't talk to Superman. He can't tell Superman what's going on, and it's bugging him, but he keeps taunting Mxyptlk. The whole time there's a running gag where he cannot say Mxyptlk's name. He keeps calling Mxyptlk the wrong thing, just to basically belittle Mxyptlk. And Mxyptlk's like, my name's not this, it's Mxyptlk. Well, at the end, obviously, when you get to the end of the story, Superman, is spoilers, finds Lois, and when they need to get rid of Mxyptlk, you have to get Mxyptlk to say his name backwards. It's Rumpelstiltskin rules. And getting Mxyptlk to say his name backwards is always the trick with any of the Mxyptlk comics, and you have to convince him somehow to do it. And that is easier said than done. But this one, they did a nice little payoff to the running gag where Kane has basically been taunting him. He calls Mxyptlk his name backward, and in doing so, Mxyptlk repeats it. So no, my name is not Kiltipsizium. And he poops. And it's a good read time. It's a fun little read. Let's talk about the standout moments. Every comic has some good standouts here, and every time I do these reviews, when I go through every comic and I rank them, I always like to find one or two moments that stand out. And there's some couple ones. First off, the big standout moment I really liked in this issue was Clark's bullcrap excuse to get out of the party as GL. Steve Lombard's is an idiot. And even he goes along with it, but he's able to deduce the fake Superman story pretty quickly, and Clark goes with it, and it's great. Second, there's a bit where Superman is fighting the monsters, but he ends up decking a skeleton. A skeleton comes out of the shadows, and he punches it out. And he quickly realizes that it was a kid dressed as a skeleton, not actually as a skeleton, because Mxyptlk is being funny that way. It's just weird because Superman goes, "Oh dang, I better not hit them that hard." Not once did he think to look, is these monsters actually real? I mean, they was never going to hurt anybody. Obviously, he wasn't going to try to hurt these monsters, but he's like has to realize he has to pull these punches because, dang, these are little kids out here, and I'm over here decking them as, dressed as skeletons. It's a silly bit, and it doesn't really go anywhere, but it's a fun bit. And that's really kind of this comic. It's kind of not a super serious comic by any means, but it's a fun little bit. Every episode here on The Never-Ending Battle, we rank the Superman stories from best to worst. We put them on our big list from best to worst. Currently, we have 3 Superman stories on the list, with number 1, the best Superman story of all time, Superman Birthright. Second on the list is Man of Steel by John Byrne. And the third and the worst Superman comic of all time, that is Superman Secret Origin by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. What we're going to do here is try to put DC Comics Presents number 53 somewhere on this big list here of, 3 Superman comics. First off, it is definitely better than Secret Origin. I had a lot more fun with this one. I would read this before I read Secret Origin again. It's one issue, one and done. Obviously, that helps a lot, but it's just a much more fun comic. That said, is it historically important compared to the others? And the answer is no. It is not better than Man of Steel. As much as I have issues with Man of Steel, and you can go back to listen to the previous episode, editor's note, Man of Steel is a much better comic than this. DC Comics Presents number 53, this Superman in the House of Mystery. It's a fun little romp. It's lighthearted. It's not going to make it's not going to change your perceptions of anything. It's a silly Mxyptlk story, and you get some fun little gags. So it's definitely not as good as Man of Steel. That brings it up to the new number 3, and that is DC Comics Presents number 53. And with that brings us to round 2. Superman and Batman number 65. Sweet Dreams, with a cover date of December 2009, with a creative team, hold on for this one, written by Peter Johnson, Matt Chernis, with art by Federico Dallacino, Brian Halliburton, Kelly Jones, Joe Quanas, and Brian Stelfreeze, with colors by David Barron and Joe Quanas, with letters by Rob Lee. Some things awry as Batman, Superman, and even Lex Luthor and the Joker begin to experience their darkest nightmares. Can the world's finest escape from their dreamscape as the heroes and villains wrestle with reality? All right, let's talk some talent. So this one's an interesting one. So I looked up a bunch of these characters, a bunch of these writers and stuff. Obviously, some of these are big name artists. Some of these aren't. So I looked up Peter Johnson and Matt Chernis. These are the writing team that are primarily known for TV executive production. Peter Johnson's famously known for working as the executive producer on Supernatural and writing some of the early tie-in comics for the series. So he's got some pretty big bona fides with Supernatural type stuff, obviously with the sci-fi stuff and all that. Matt Chernis is the current head of Apple TV Plus programming. He is the person who picks and greenlit shows for Apple TV Plus. And over here, he is slumming it up, writing a random issue of Superman Batman towards the end of the series' run. We're kind of doing a fill-in issue here for Halloween. But the two seem to be frequent collaborators together. They work together for various comics. They seem to do they did a big Namor series for Marvel at the time. The art team. So I'm not going to go into each of these major artists right away, but it is worth mentioning. The art team is actually a really interesting mixture of top talent, such as Kelly Jones and Brian Stelfreeze, with what I believe to have been at the time up-and-coming talent like Joe Quanas. So let's talk about the comic. Jeez. So this one is weird. First off, it's a random fill-in issue of Superman Batman. Now, Superman Batman, for those who are unaware, Superman Batman was the somewhat long-running team-up book. Basically, it wasn't World's Finest at this point. They didn't call it that. It was launched by Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness in the early mid-2000s, kind of that lead up to Infinite Crisis. And they pretty much do a lot of good. There's decent stories there. I like them. And it does a lot to kind of revive some of the Silver Age elements. This is where modern Supergirl gets reintroduced. What was originally the Silver Age Supergirl, Kara Zor-El. This one is not the world's finest, though, by any means. Only because this comic is very middling and cliche. It's doing a very basic story. It's also trying to do a lot in the amount of space it's given. It's a one-issue, one-and-done story, much like the previous one on the list. It's trying to tell a story showing the darkest nightmares of each of the characters, kind of get to each of the inner characters' pathos. So we see inside Superman's pathos. The Superman story is the most underdeveloped of the bunch, personally. It shows us Superman that is having this weird, surreal, dreamlike situation where all of his friends and family are riding on the same commercial airliner, and that commercial airliner's is crashing. And no matter how hard and how fast or how quick he is, Superman seems to not be able to catch that plane, and it crashes, killing Lois and all the Mom, Pa, Ken, and all the other family members. Admittedly, it's a very surreal one. It kind of captures the dreamlike situation going on, and obviously makes it very clear that we're dealing with dreams. But it's just doesn't pay off in any meaningful way, and it's not something I really enjoyed. I thought it was a very dull little story. The other parts that are a little bit better, I mean, the Joker story is honestly not half bad. It's got Kelly Jones on art, and Kelly Jones is a fantastic artist. If you want obviously a fantastic Batman artist in general. His Batman art is some of the finest of the late 80s, early 90s. Honestly, throughout the 90s, if you can get a chance to see a Kelly Jones story, it's usually worth a read. And he's obviously a great pickup to do a quick Joker story. We're talking like 3 or 4 pages here. It just kind of captures the surrealness of the Joker. It's like the Joker's nightmare. What do you expect the Joker's nightmare to look like? And it's kind of an interesting look at the character. He doesn't want to be viewed as just a clown. He honestly thinks it's not very funny. And he doesn't want to be viewed as just a clown. He wants to be viewed as something serious and be afraid of. And I'm not the biggest Joker fan, so I don't know how well that captures the essence of the character, but I do think it's at least a very interesting take compared to some other stories out there that you can find about the Joker. It's a different look. The main thing is Kelly Jones draws the heck out of it. It's pretty weird. It looks cool. It's not the weirdest thing Kelly Jones has ever drawn, but it's a very cool looking Kelly Jones comic. Can't complain there. 4 or 5 pages, pretty fun. The Luthor story. Now that one is, well, it looks good. It has more questions than answers. Basically the Luthor story is he thinks he's going to get revenge against Superman. He must obviously know the identity of Clark as Superman at this point in time. Admittedly, it's been a while since I've read this post-Infinite Crisis era of Superman. I don't recall him knowing Clark Kent is Superman. I don't think that's a thing. That really wasn't a thing until the New 52 era. I may be mistaken. I have to go double check. Luthor thinks he's going to get revenge, and turns out he's actually dreaming himself as Jimmy Olsen. The biggest draw there is Linus's art is amazing for this. He just kind of captures that kind of silliness there, the kind of lighthearted look. It's a really good cartoony style for the Luthor story. It works. It just brings up weird questions about the continuity of things, but that's not really worth getting bogged down on. It just doesn't kind of pan out. It is interesting to see Luthor's biggest nightmares to be viewed as a somewhat insignificant person or a subordinate, not a person in charge. Now, the most definitive part here is the Batman story. This is probably the darkest one. Well, it is the darkest one by all means. Good God. The Batman story is basically he gets everything he's ever wanted. He wakes up, he's married to Selena Kyle, he has a kid, his parents are alive, everything's great until Alfred starts shooting up the joint. And basically says, we are going to fix this problem, Master Bruce, and we're going to make you be Batman again. And it is surreal. It does feel like a dream. It does capture that dreamlike quality that we want to see in a comic, especially a comic like this. And it does have that nightmare feeling because everything got a weird surreal imagery at times, like when Alfred serves him a bat on a platter. And the fact that Alfred shoots his parents and makes Bruce shoot his parents is a choice. I don't know if it's a good choice, but it's a choice. It just made for a really weird comic, though. It's overly dark and edgelordy. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against this kind of stuff. I mean, there's a time and place for this. And when you're doing a comic like this, yeah, fine. This is meant to be a little one-shot comic. It's a fill-in. You're going to get people trying to do their best here. The whole idea is that there's true spoilers. It's the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow, for some reason, is manipulating the dreams of the 4 characters. Why is he targeting Luthor and Joker as well as Batman and Superman? I don't know. Scarecrow is kind of an interesting Batman rogue. He does interact with Joker more so than the others and all that. It's just really weird that he picked on all 4 of them. And the fight they're fighting, it makes no sense either. Why is Joker and Luthor fighting Batman and Superman in the middle of the streets of, I believe it's Gotham? And the framing device it's where the problem really hits. Brian Stelfreeze is an amazing, talented artist. His Scarecrow looks really cool. I think his decision to give Batman actual somewhat realistic eyes is kind of an odd choice. I think Batman works best whenever his eyes are completely white. Looks really cool, looks really textury, but the idea of putting Luthor and Joker on the same team is not unusual, but putting them in like just a random straight up brawl, and the Luthor's power suit they picked here that Stelfreeze drawn looks terrible. It's like the worst looking power suit for Luthor, and it just does not work. The comic has no real examples. The stories, the 4 shorts, I mean, the Joker one aside, and the Luthor one's kind of got its moments. The Batman and Superman stories, the Superman one's underdeveloped and undercooked, and the Batman one's trying too hard to be something edgy. None of them really work. Then on top of all that, Scarecrow's motivations are not found in the comic, other than he just doesn't really like Joker and Luthor. It creates a situation where the comic feels too rushed, because there's so much happening in the comic. We have 4 short stories in a standard issue comic. We're getting a 4-part anthology plus a framing device in a standard issue. That's a lot of stuff going on. That's about 3 to 4 pages a bit. And 3 to 4 pages is just a lot of pages, not a lot of pages for each thing. So everything feels very fleeting. And at the same time, the ideas that are interesting are not fully explored. I really would have liked a little bit more of the Joker page. I think the Batman stuff would have probably worked a little bit better, because it kind of has this like dark twisted version on The Man Who Has Everything, that famous Alan Moore comic, Superman comic, where he does have everything, but he quickly gets it taken away. And there's no build up to it. There's no sterility. If they had the ability to make this like a 2-part story, that might have actually really worked, because you could have had Superman dealing with these problems, dealing with all that, and we don't know they're in a dream for a little while longer. We're quickly told it's a dream. And yeah, we're doing a Scarecrow. It's fine, but it's just not really a interesting comic. It doesn't make a bit of lick of sense for it, and it just doesn't work. That said, let's talk about some standout moments here. While I did not care for this comic that much, there are some standouts. Mostly the Kelly Jones Joker story. He still got it. It's really cool when Joker just looks good. It looks sleek. Joker is pretty scary there, and you kind of get this like kind of a decent look. It's not the best look at the Joker psychosis and psychology. It's just a good look at the Joker in general, and it's fine. The rest of the book, though, like the Superman story is lacking. The Luthor story is funny but asks questions, and the Batman story is just a lot to swallow. So there's not a lot here. So with that said, I believe it's time to rank Superman Batman number 65 on the list. At this point, it is definitely the weaker of the story of the night. It's definitely the weakest story by all means. The question becomes quickly, is it worse than Secret Origin? Secret Origin is rehashing elements of Superman's history that doesn't do anything. It's repetitive, it's dull, it's just mush. This is taking very repetitive storytelling elements. While uneven art, much better art. The highs are higher. I like the Kelly Jones stuff. And while the lows are a little bit lower, the art's still a little bit more consistent. Personally, I'll read any of these artists over Gary Frank any day. It's 1 issue versus 6. Secret Origin was a chore to read. It was 6 issues, but it took me like 3 or 4 days to sit through it, because it just got so unengaging. It was just not interesting. This here, it's 22 pages. Knock it out real fast. But is it the worst comic of all time? Worst Superman story of all time? I strongly disagree. I will put it as the new number 4 on the list, and putting it just 1 rank above Superman's Secret Origin. And with that brings us to the final episode of the night. Round 3, the Rutland, Vermont Halloween Saga. This is an unofficial Marvel and DC crossover spanning 3 different titles of that month in October 1972. Justice League of America number 103, A Stranger Walks Among Us, with a cover date of December 1972, written by Len Wein, Dick DealLen on art, Dick Giordano on inks, and letters by Ben Oda. Over at Marvel, we have Amazing Adventures Volume 2, number 16, and The Juggernaut Will Get You, If You Don't Watch Out, with a cover date of January 1973. Written by Steve Engleheart, art by Bob Brown, inks by Frank McLaughlin, letters by Charlotte Jeter, colors by Glynis Oliver, and Thor number 207, Fire Sword, with a cover date of, again, January 1973. Written by Gerry Conway, art by John Buscema, Inks by Vince Coletta, because this book was coming out late probably, or moving out fast. Letters by Denise Vladimir. Colors by Glynis Oliver again. And both Marvel books, I also have credited Marie Severin as a character artist. Quick note, as this is a Marvel DC crossover, there is some discrepancies with the cover dates. Those are different policies at the time. DC was running about 2 months off from the actual publication date, and the Marvel books were running about 3 months off from publication date at this point in the 1970s. Given that this is a Marvel DC crossover in secret, it has kind of got a weird plot structure. So when we're doing the plot synopsis here, it's important to understand. Technically, all three of these books are interconnected, but they're not interconnected with their A-plots. The A-plots are strictly self-contained to the book, so when we do the plot synopsis, we're primarily going to talk about the A-plots. But there is a running B-plot through all three books, and it's worth mentioning it. And that's actually what makes this so much more fun, and what makes this whole Rutland, Vermont Halloween saga worth talking about in the first place. So first off, plot synopsis for Justice League number 103. The Phantom Stranger has recruited members of the Venerable Justice League of America to stop the devious Felix Faust from completing his latest demonic pact. Their journey brings them to the real-world town of Rutland, Vermont, noted for their love of Halloween and their superhero costume parades. Meanwhile, a quartet of strikingly familiar people are on their way to Rutland to attend a Halloween party hosted by Tom Fagan. Tom Fagan being the main person at Rutland that would organize these parades. Ultimately, can the JLA stop Felix Faust and save the world from his devilish plot? And what does this have to do with those four people with the world's worst Mustang? We'll find out. Now, over in Thor, number 207, The Fire Sword, Thor's battle with the Absorbing Man brings him to Rutland, Vermont, where he must battle the dangerous Crusher Creel and his devious half-brother Loki. Meanwhile, the same four people with the terrible Mustang find themselves enthralled to Loki's commands. Is Thor worthy enough to overcome his half-brother's machinations and save the town of Rutland from Loki's grasp and Halloween if it's possible? We'll see. And lastly, Amazing Adventures, number 15. The Beast and Vera Cantor are on their way to Canada to stop the Secret Empire, and along the way they hitch a ride with the same four people in that beater of a Mustang on their way to Rutland for the Halloween party. Beast and Vera are on their mission to save the world, but not if the Juggernaut has anything to say about it on this dark Halloween. Can the Beast stop the Juggernaut and make it to Canada in time to stop the Secret Empire? We'll see. So, as you can probably gather, there is this whole subplot. The A-plots are all their own different things. You got the A-plot in the Justice League book is about the League literally meeting the Phantom Stranger for the first time outside of, Batman. The whole League meeting the Phantom Stranger and dealing with Felix Faust. We're doing some typical Justice League stuff of that time. We have Thor dealing with Loki, the Absorbing Man. Again, not too out of ordinary for the book at the time. And we have the whole Steve Engleheart story going on in the Amazing Adventures, as Steve Engleheart is trying his darndest to get this Secret Empire story out on the pages, and that's all going on. And this is also during that time when Marvel did not know what to do with the X-Men, so we have Beast doing his own solo stories. It eventually ends with Beast joining the Avengers and all that stuff. But either way, those are all the A plots. They're all pretty much self-contained. They all do their own thing. The B plot is the interesting part. So this is where we're going to go ahead and talk talent, because this is where the B plot comes in. So obviously the B plot is dealing with the creators. So the B plot is the four people driving the terrible Mustang, the four familiar people, are all representations of the four creative team members that are primarily involved with this book. We have Gerry Conway, Len Wein, Steve Engleheart, and Glynis Oliver. All four of them are involved in this party. They're all four friends in real life. And in case of Glynis Oliver and Len Wein, they were married at the time. So each of them have their own amazing talents. Let's go and mention this real quick. Len Wein is the writer and editor responsible for most of your favorite Bronze Age comics, be it The Incredible Hulk, Giant Size X-Men, Batman, or Justice League. He's the man who would help even create Wolverine, no matter what Roy Thomas would claim. He's a big deal. Len Wein, if you don't know who Len Wein is, I highly recommend checking out his work. He helps create SwanMr, for goodness sake. He is an important creator, rest his soul, and screw Roy Thomas. Man, that guy sucks. Now, the other creators are just as prolific as Len Wein. We have Gerry Conway. Gerry Conway is one of the most prolific creators of his era. He has lengthy runs on Superman, Justice League, Spider-Man, and he's responsible for co-creating some notable characters from the late 70s, early 80s with Power Girl, Firestorm, and, this little character from Marvel called the Punisher. Steve Engleheart is just as big of a deal as Wein and Gerry Conway in a lot of ways. Probably not as the upper echelon. Wein ends up getting major credit because Wein goes into editorial, Gerry Conway goes into editorial. As far as I know, Steve Engleheart never really did a large stints in editorial, but he does have long stretches on the Avengers, Captain America, Green Lantern, and Batman. And then we have Glynis Oliver, again at the time known as Glynis Wein, and you'll see her credited as multiple names if you read the older books. She's the colorist extraordinaire for Marvel. Chances are, if you read any X-Men books, you read a Glynis Oliver colored book. And then there's John Buscema. While John Buscema is not in the book as a character, John Buscema is in the book as, John Buscema. While John Buscema is not in any of these stories as one of the characters, he's not one of the Mustang Four, as I call them. He is the... Let's be honest. John Buscema literally drew the book on Marvel House style. He's the one that draws how to draw comics the Marvel way. He is the look of the Marvel Bronze Age. So this is a really interesting book. So I think the background behind it being this weird stealth crossover between Marvel and DC is what makes it very famous, obviously. And I was when I came across it by looking up, I knew this crossover happened. There's just always been these Rutland, Vermont stories, and they've always snuck in character references in the background. Not expecting when I was looking through the books for this episode, I was doing research, and I happened to come across a Halloween issue of Justice League of America, and I was like, oh sweet, Halloween Justice League of America. I haven't done a Justice League book yet for the podcast, and I'm like, okay, let's do that. Let's pick up an issue of Justice League of America, and it's Halloween. And I noticed this is taking place in Rutland, Vermont. That's awesome. Then I posted about it online, and somebody goes, hey, I think that's one of those Marvel crossover books. I'm like, oh, it is. And lo and behold, not only does DC Infinite have the Justice League 103, Marvel Unlimited app has the other two parts. So I was like, hot dog, I want to read it. Now, when it came time to debate, when I was debating internally, should I include the other two stories into this? Or should I just review, Justice League of America number 103? And that was a really strong internal debate. So when I picked this story and I decided, when I picked it, I was like, at first I was going, no, let's don't do that because I don't want to stretch the rules. As I mentioned in the intro of this episode, I'm really stretching the limits here by including two Marvel books that technically Superman does not appear in. Superman does not appear in either of those books, more so than anything else. But what I thought was interesting and what makes this more compelling of a story, because otherwise Justice League of America number 103 is just another Felix Faust story. There's some interesting bits with the Phantom Stranger, and Len Wein's a capable storyteller. We'll talk more about it in a second. So it's a perfectly fine comic. It's beautiful. It reads well. It kind of flows weird logically, but that's not unusual for this era of, early, this Bronze Age pre-crisis Justice League. But that aside, on its own is fine. But I think it's really important when you put it in this context of the time when, a group of four friends decided to just secretly go out and make this stealth crossover, write themselves into this book to kind of create this weird B plot that if you were a comic book reader at the time going off the newsstands or even subscription, and you happen to be reading all three books, you'd be surprised that, holy crap, these kind of connect. And you didn't have to read them all. You could read the DC one and it was fine. And if you happen to be reading multiple Marvel books, you'll notice, hey, there's some connective tissue. But each of these are beautifully standalone. That's one of the things I like about it. But it's kind of an interesting little tidbit. And I'm like, hey, we can't get rid of this artifact of history. And now I would be doing a disservice here on the Never-Ending Battle if I did not include some historical context. So I'm like, hey, it's my podcast. I make them up as I do it. Let's put these two Marvel books in here. And we'll actually consider them into the rankings, so it's going to be fun. So that's one of the reasons I picked it. As for the crossover itself, as I mentioned, it does work as, a crossover to some extent. The B-plot being the thread actually is a pretty nice way to do it because it helps it be a self-contained story and helps get around the whole pesky, we can't have our characters in each other's books. I mean, Marvel could have probably got around that at the time. They could have easily put Thor in the Amazing Adventures book. That wouldn't have been a problem, more than likely. But the fact that they didn't, but they kind of have these books happening between the raindrops on each other, and it kind of works, sort of. It's a mess. Let's be real here. The crossover itself, it's kind of a mess in terms of timing. There's literally the group enters the town of Rutland 3 different times. They're pulling in once at the beginning of the Justice League book. Well, not the beginning. Towards the beginning of the Justice League book. They're pulling in again at the beginning of Amazing Adventures. They're actually dealing with the scary hitchhiker, the Beast, who ends up switching into his human disguise. And again, we see them try and drive in whenever Thor's doing battle with Absorbing Man. Clunky. It's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the recap happen like 3 times. So timing wise, it's a little clunky. But that said, it's a lot of fun. And that's what I like about it. There's a lot of insider jokes going on here. And I'm not even privy to all the Marvel events going on at this time. Like all the weird background stuff Marvel has going on. I mean, early 70s Marvel is not my wheelhouse, but it's very interesting. I think it's a very compelling story in terms of like all these little bits, and I think it's very fun. The jokes are making cracks at each other, at the characters, and they're also just mostly dragging Steve Englehart's piece of trash Mustang. I don't know how he drove that thing. The muffler is literally falling on, and in that falling off, it's a plot point, an essential plot point for the Justice League comic, that the muffler sucks. That the muffler is so bad, this Mustang is such a piece of crap. That is actually the major plot point for how they capture Felix Faust. It is hilarious. So I think it's a fun book. What makes the crossover fun is also how they incorporated the creative team. So the creative team actually acts like this soap opera kind of background. They're making jokes about each other, but it's also kind of got that melodramatic soap opera that's characterized in the Bronze Age. And we get stuff like, them just cutting back and forth, and we see characters disappear and reappear. Like we see Glynis Oliver. Glynis disappears midway through this story. And during the Thor story, she disappears in the Thor story, and the Amazing Adventure story, I think she's also disappeared. But she shows up in the middle of the Justice League story attacking, because the whole premise of the book, at least in the League story, the Justice League is dealing with Felix Faust, who's making a deal with the devil. Well, devils. And like he always does, Felix Faust is always trying to selling a soul in a buyer's market. So he's trying to make a deal here. And one of the things he's using is he's having the demons possess people who are dressed up as their Halloween costumes and giving them the ability of their Halloween costumes. Kind of rehash of the House of Mystery type thing going on. Or House of Mystery is rehashing it because House of Mystery came like 10 years after this. So we're having, Felix Faust magical powers. And you got people who are dressed as superheroes, because this is a superhero parade, attacking the Justice League. And Glynis Oliver is dressed as Supergirl, and she attacks the Justice League. She actually fights Hawkman, and there's a great little bit with her and Hawkman going at it. And she's a major player in the book. Glynis Oliver gets, steals Hawkman's chess piece, so you mess with him pretty much, takes out Hawkman pretty easily. So it's a fun little bit there. The rest of the characters are incorporated with that. We see Tom Fagan. We see all these nice little subtle bits. And what's interesting to me is how the battle goes down. DC is not afraid, or at least at the time was not afraid to show Marvel trademarked characters, or at least they were willing to push the limits a lot more. So we actually see DC characters fighting straight up Marvel characters. So not only do we have to deal with, there's evil Supergirl. That's fine. But they're straight up like ripoff of Captain America and Spider-Man and Thor fighting the Justice League. And that is a fantastic little bit. So in Justice League, they're over here like dealing with all these demon-possessed people. And, they're straight up Captain America just beating down on Flash. We see Batman having to deal with a possessed possessed kid looking like the Robin. That was kind of a nice little gag. But also dealing with other characters, dealing with the Spider-Man, and dealing with a Thor. I think actually it was Superman had to fight Thor. I thought it was. But, Thor's actually in the comic crossover. It's not the same Thor. It's a different guy dressed as Thor. So it's just a nice little bit. They're all dressed up characters. And the Justice League book, not only does it show these Marvel characters as they are, because trust me, they're straight up. You can tell that's Spider-Man. You can tell that's Captain America. You can tell it's Thor. Marvel's Thor. These aren't just some, knockoff characters. They're straight up the characters. They look like Halloween costumes. That's kind of how they get around it. But you also see other things. So at this time, this is the time of the multiverse still. This is pre-crisis. So we're dealing with the idea that there's a definitive Earth 1, definitive Earth 2. So we see a lot of Earth 2 characters in here in the background. If you look around the Halloween parade, you'll see Jay Garrick Flash. You may see an Alan Scott Green Lantern. And also there's a nice little bit where they include some Earth S characters. Now, Earth S was the Earth for Shazam characters, and also the other Fawcett comic ones, but Shazam being the main one. Captain Marvel, for those who prefer that, and honestly me too. So we have all these Captain Marvel characters. There's actually somebody dressed as, Captain Marvel, and there's a bit where he fights Superman, which is still novel at the time. Superman versus Captain Marvel is still fun, and it's not, while it's technically not Captain Marvel, it's a really good bit. And DC really runs with the concept a lot better than Marvel does. Marvel is very shy. Marvel doesn't put all these characters into the book. So Marvel's characters, for example, Tom Fagan is dressed as Batman in the Justice League story. And when you get to the Marvel books, he's dressed as Nighthawk, which is actually a nice little nod, because Nighthawk is meant to be, it's Roy Thomas's Squadron Supreme version of Batman. So there's nice little nods. But the interesting one, as a little bit here, uh, is when Glynis Oliver is dressed as Supergirl. She's straight up dressed as Supergirl in the DC book, but when she goes over in the Marvel book, she's still dressed as Supergirl, but the SHIELD logo changes. It goes from, I think it's a P or something, or an M. I can't remember. It looks different. And then the actual Supergirl shield, they call her Power Girl, which is really interesting because, Gerry Conway, and Gerry Conway creates Power Girl not that much later than this, about 3 or 4 years later. So we end up having a Power Girl reference. So this is a nice little bit. I think it's interesting and it's fun. I think the Englehart's Mustang being this piece of crap, being the linchpin, is literally how they catch Felix Faust in the Justice League story. Is great because he gets away. He's defeated, but he still manages to get away. And the police pull him over after he takes Steve Englehart's terrible Mustang. And the police pull him over, and Felix Faust is like, "I don't know how you got me. I don't know how you caught me. I'm out of magic. I'm done. I'm spent. I'm the one who did all this." And the police they're just chuckling like, "We're just going to pull you over about this terrible muffler on this thing." And they end up arresting him, so it's funny. The rest of the stories, the Thor book is really fun. Just a little note here, the Thor comic it's fun. It's Thor versus Absorbing Man, which is always a good time, and Thor versus Loki. And the Loki fight's actually really cool. What Loki's doing is using the town of Rutland to help power this fire sword to help battle Thor. And there's all this little melodrama stuff going on the sidelines with Sif. And I don't know. I've never read Gerry Conway's Thor. This is the first issue of that. It's fine. I'm more of a Walt Simonson kind of guy when it comes to Thor, or Jason Aaron, but it's a perfectly serviceable Thor. And then the Amazing Adventures is just a weird comic. Steve Englehart is a talented writer. I'm not going to say otherwise. But having the Beast versus Juggernaut, it makes sense. X-Men versus Juggernaut. But the fact that the Beast is mostly able to single-handedly take out the Juggernaut is weird. Like, really weird. Steve Englehart must have not read the bit, because there's a whole bit with the how Beast takes out the Juggernaut is by taking off his helmet. Yeah, the Juggernaut's helmet is important. The helmet helps protect him from psychic attacks. But when he takes off the helmet in the comic, it depowers the Juggernaut in Amazing Adventures, and that's not how that works. And he rapidly starts aging because the Juggernaut's had this whole ongoing, I'm going to say B plot, C plot going on, where he's been dealing with the Edge of Eternity and Oblivion and Doctor Strange and doing all the supernatural stuff as the X-Men books have been in limbo. And he's kind of doing stuff. It's weird. And he rapidly ages, though, because of this. And it makes not a lick of sense. So with all that said, I think it's time to talk about the standout moment of the comic. I do really enjoy these stories. This story was fun. The Justice League story is really good. I enjoy the Justice League story. It's a simple Felix Faust story. There's always go a very familiar way. There's always some kind of trickery because Felix Faust is doing some kind of deal with the devil, because that's his whole gimmick. And they're just bits there, and they have fun with it. They get Dick Dillon goes out there and he puts a bunch of little visual references in there, and we see Superman dealing with stuff. As a Superman story, it's not very much, but its standout moment there is the fight between Superman and the not Captain Marvel, because it's the novelty thing. And at the time, DC did have the rights to Captain Marvel at this time. It's not normal. It's not usual. We don't see that very often. I think it's been teased a few times up to this point, and it doesn't really happen until we get to All-Star Squadron, and even then it's barely at that. But yeah, it's not normal. It's not normal. We saw the Captain Marvel versus Shazam, and actually the whole bit where they're fighting the other superheroes, the demon-possessed costume goers, is really fun. And with that, it's time to put the Rutland, Vermont Halloween Saga, aka Justice League number 103, Amazing Adventures number 16, and Thor number 207 on our list. Alright, so right now we have, at the end of the day, I think this, to me personally, is the story of the night. It's silly. It's dumb. I had a lot of fun with it, though. Historically, it's not critical. It's not going to be life-changing. The Felix Faust bit is just a Felix Faust story. Is it kind of a big deal, I think, in the Thor stuff, I believe? Maybe. I don't know. But no, it actually does matter in the grand scheme of things for the Beast. It actually does deal with the Beast storyline. But that's a Marvel thing. As a Superman story, the Rutland, Vermont Halloween saga is not like the biggest Superman story. It's just Superman's there. He has some moments. It's a Phantom Stranger story and a Felix Faust story. But that's it. I did have a lot of fun with it. I would reread this again easily. I would reread all 3 parts. I like the bits with the creative teams talking to each other, dealing with all that, and making jokes about Roy Thomas sucking and Marvel not paying worth a dang. I thought those were fun. We have on the list, we put in Superman the House of Mystery at currently number 3. And I think Rutland, Vermont Halloween crossover kind of edges up above that and puts it right below the Man of Steel at number 2. Man of Steel's at number 2. And with that, that's the episode. I thought this was a pretty good one. I thought the Halloween stuff was actually really interesting. Now, let's talk about what you can find me doing around the internet these days. Obviously, we're releasing the show here at the Never Ending Battle every Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. You can like and review us. You can leave comments on the website of extremelyuncanny.com, where you can also find a visual companion that goes along with this episode with images and cover galleries and all sorts of lovely stuff, including a link to the master list. Also, you can find me on comicsbeat.com, where I am currently writing on the Marvel Rundown, and over at Wednesday Comics, where each week on the Wednesday Comics, I'm doing a non-Big 2 book a week. Over at the Marvel Rundown here lately, I've been covering the Age of Revelation, along with a bunch of other little books over there with the team. You should definitely check us out. We've been doing a lot of good work there. I'm very proud of us because we've been busy holding Marvel to task, as their books have been largely playing it safe. And join me next week as the Never Ending Battle travels to the Elseworlds, as we look at 3 Superman Elseworld stories and rank them on our big list. And as a reminder, never stop fighting for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Have a great evening, everyone. See you next week.